Let me ask you something. What would you do if the grave you've been visiting every Sunday, the one you've cried over for 2 straight years, suddenly felt empty? My name is Alan Whitaker. I'm 60 years old. I own a little used bookstore in German Village, Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where the floorboards creak when you walk across them and the air always smells like old paper and coffee. I open the shop at 7 every morning, flip the sign, and wait for the regulars who come in for a quiet corner and a good story. Most days, I'm fine. Most days I can smile at the customers and pretend the hole in my chest is just heartburn from too much black coffee. But some mornings the question hits me again, hard and cold like the October wind coming off the Scioto River. What if that grave really is empty? 2 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday in late September, I buried my only daughter, Sophie. 30 years old. Bright, stubborn, the kind of laugh that made strangers turn around in the grocery store just to see who was so happy. The doctors called it cardiac arrest, said young women sometimes just stop. No warning. No reason. I stood there in the funeral home with my wife Ellen beside me, both of us staring at a closed casket because Marcus, her husband, said Sophie wouldn't have wanted people seeing her like that. I believed him. What kind of monster lies about something like that? Ellen and I had been married 34 years. She still argues with the television like it can hear her. Still makes the best meatloaf in German Village. Still holds my hand when we walk down the brick sidewalks at dusk. Losing Sophie broke something in both of us. Ellen stopped sleeping through the night. I started waking up at 3 in the morning with my heart hammering like I'd run a marathon. We went to counseling. We planted flowers at the grave every Sunday. We did everything normal grieving parents are supposed to do. And every single Friday, without fail, I drove over to the apartment on the edge of Short North and handed Marcus $600 in cash. I told myself it was the right thing. Sophie had been the breadwinner. Marcus lost his job right before she died. Convenient. I remember thinking at the time. But grief makes you ignore little red flags. So I kept writing the checks. Ellen thought I was being generous. I told myself I was honoring my daughter's memory. Looking back now, I was just being the world's most reliable fool. The bookstore was quiet that particular morning. A few regulars drifted in Mrs. Hargrove looking for another mystery novel. Old Mr. Delgado wanting the new biography of Teddy Roosevelt. They all asked the same question they'd been asking for 2 years. How you holding up, Alan? I gave them the same answer I always did. One day at a time. I smiled while I said it. The smile had become automatic, like muscle memory. But inside, something had started to shift. A tiny crack in the wall I'd built around the grief. I didn't know it yet. But that crack was about to become a canyon. Around 11 o'clock, I stepped into the back room to make more coffee. The radio was playing low, some old Springsteen song about lost highways and second chances. I stood there, staring at the calendar on the wall. October 12th. 2 years and 3 weeks since the funeral. I reached into the drawer where I kept the cash envelope, the one I prepared every Thursday night. 6 crisp $100 bills. I counted them again, the way I always did, like touching them somehow kept Sophie's memory alive. That was when the phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Marcus. See you tomorrow, Alan. Thanks again. The same message he sent every week. Polite. Grateful. Fake as a $3 bill. I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket and went back out front. The shop smelled like rain coming in through the open door. Customers were chatting about the Browns game. Life moving on. The way it does. But something in my chest felt different today. Tighter. Like the air before a thunderstorm. I didn't know it then. But that ordinary Thursday was the last normal day I would have for a very long time. By late afternoon, the sky had turned that heavy gray Ohio October gets when winter is thinking about showing up early. I locked the shop, flipped the sign to closed, and started the short walk home through German Village. The brick sidewalks were slick with fallen leaves. Kids on bikes raced past me laughing. A young couple pushed a stroller and waved like they knew me. I waved back. Always do. That's the kind of neighborhood this is. Everybody knows your name and your story, whether you want them to or not. Ellen was in the kitchen when I got home. She had the radio on the same station I'd been listening to at the shop. She looked up from chopping onions and gave me that soft smile she saves just for me. "Long day?" she asked. "Same as yesterday," I said. But it wasn't. Not really. That little crack in the wall was still there, letting in the cold. I kissed her on the cheek, the way I've done for 34 years, and went upstairs to change. In the bedroom, I pulled the cash envelope out of my jacket and set it on the dresser next to the framed photo of Sophie on her wedding day. She was smiling so big in that picture, looking at Marcus like he hung the moon. I stared at it for a long minute, thumb brushing across the glass like I could somehow reach her. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow, I would hand Marcus another $600 and tell myself I was doing the right thing, just like I had every week, for 2 years. I had no idea that by this time tomorrow, everything I thought I knew about my daughter, my family, and the grave I visited every Sunday would be completely, irreversibly shattered. The next morning arrived too quickly, the way bad days sometimes do. I woke before the alarm, the cash envelope still sitting on the dresser like a quiet accusation. Ellen was already downstairs making coffee. I could smell it from the bedroom, strong, black, the way we both liked it since Sophie passed. I dressed in the same flannel shirt I wear every Friday, slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket, and told myself this was just another ordinary day. By 9:30, I was walking the 6 blocks from German Village to Harrove's Pharmacy on the corner of 3rd and Mohawk. The air was crisp, carrying that sharp October bite that makes your eyes water. Leaves crunched under my boots. A couple of joggers passed me, breath fogging in the cold. Normal. Everything felt normal until I pushed open the glass door, and the little bell above it jingled. Roy Abernathy looked up from behind the counter the way he always did. Calm, methodical, the kind of man who alphabetized his sock drawer and never forgot a face. He'd been filling my prescriptions for 15 years. We weren't exactly friends, but we were the kind of familiar that comes from knowing someone's blood pressure numbers and insurance copay by heart. "Morning, Alan," he said, already reaching for the white paper bag with my blood pressure meds. "Same as usual?" "Same as usual," I answered, sliding my card across the counter. He rang me up, handed me the bag, then paused. His eyes flicked left, then right, like he was checking for customers. The store was empty, except for old Mrs. Callahan browsing the vitamin aisle way in the back. Roy leaned forward, elbows on the counter, voice dropping so low, I had to tilt my head toward him. "Alan, can I ask you something strange?" I chuckled, figuring he was about to tell me one of his dry jokes about cholesterol. "Strange is fine, Roy." "Hit me." He didn't smile. Instead, he turned the computer monitor just enough for me to see the screen. Rows of prescription records. He tapped one line with a blunt finger. "Is your daughter still? I mean, forgive me, but is Sophie still alive?" My heart didn't just skip a beat. It slammed to a full stop, then restarted in a wrong, stuttering rhythm that made my ears ring. The pharmacy lights suddenly felt too bright. The smell of antiseptic and cheap perfume from the perfume counter turned thick in my throat. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard the wood creaked. "Roy," I said slowly, the words scraping out. "Sophie passed away 2 years ago. You sent flowers to the funeral home. Ellen still has the card on the fridge." He nodded like he'd already known what I was going to say. His face stayed calm, but his eyes, those careful pharmacist eyes, looked troubled. "Then somebody needs to explain why her prescriptions have been filled here every month for the past 20 months. The words landed like a punch I didn't see coming. 20 months. Sophie had been gone for 25 months. And for 20 of those months, someone had been walking into this very store, handing over her insurance card, and walking out with her medications, allergy pills, sleeping pills, the same ones she'd taken since she was 25. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Roy glanced toward Mrs. Callahan again, then back at me. "I shouldn't be telling you this, privacy laws. But something about the death certificate on file never sat right with me. The seal looks off. The registrar's signature doesn't match the ones I've seen 1,000 times. I flagged it once when the insurance company questioned a claim, but nobody followed up. Until now. He slid a small slip of paper across the counter, just a note with a date and a prescription number. His handwriting was neat, almost apologetic. I can't tell you who picked them up, but I can tell you they used her card and signed her name every single month. The floor felt like it was tilting. I thought about the $600 envelope in my pocket, about Marcus's text last night, about the closed casket and Ellen crying in the car on the way home from the funeral. I thought about Sunday mornings at the cemetery, laying fresh flowers on a grave that suddenly felt like it might be nothing but dirt and lies. Roy's voice softened even more. Alan, I'm not saying I know what's going on, but I know what I see, and what I see doesn't add up. I managed a nod. My throat had closed tight. I thanked him. I think I thanked him, and walked out of the pharmacy on legs that didn't feel like mine. The bell jingled behind me again, cheerful and obscene. Outside, the October wind hit me full in the face. I stood on the sidewalk for a long minute, bag of blood pressure meds clutched in my fist like it could anchor me to the ground. Cars passed. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Life kept moving while my entire world quietly cracked open. I got in the car and drove, not toward Marcus's apartment, not toward home, just drove, circling the brick streets of German Village, past the bookstore I'd locked up only yesterday, past the little park where Sophie used to push her bike when she was 7. The cash envelope burned in my pocket. $600 I was supposed to hand over in less than an hour. My phone rang. Ellen. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to say the words out loud yet, because here's the thing nobody tells you about grief. You spend months bargaining with it, then years learning to live around the empty space it leaves. You build a life that fits the hole, and then one ordinary Friday morning, a quiet pharmacist leans across a counter and tells you the hole might not even be real. I pulled over near the Scioto River overlook, killed the engine, and sat there staring at the water. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel to make them stop. 20 months of prescriptions, a death certificate that didn't look right, and somewhere in this city someone had been living on my daughter's name while I paid her husband to keep grieving. The thought settled in my chest like ice. I finally started the car again and pointed it toward home. The drive was completely silent except for the low hum of the heater and the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and wrong in my ears. Ellen was going to ask what happened the second I walked through the door. I didn't know how I was going to answer. All I knew was that the wall I'd built around my grief had just been blown wide open, and whatever was on the other side looked a hell of a lot like the truth. I pulled into the driveway of our little brick house on Mohawk Street, the engine ticking as it cooled. Ellen's car was already there. I sat for a long minute, hands still on the wheel, before I could make myself go inside. The moment I stepped through the back door, Ellen knew. She was standing at the kitchen counter wiping her hands on a dish towel. But she froze when she saw my face. The color drained from her cheeks the way it does when someone hears bad news before the words are even spoken. Alan? Her voice was small. What happened? I didn't answer right away. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door, the cash envelope still heavy in the inside pocket, and walked straight to the kitchen table, the same oak table where Sophie used to sit doing homework with her legs swinging, where she once spilled an entire bowl of cereal and blamed the cat we didn't even own. I pulled out a chair and sat down hard. Ellen set the dish towel aside and sat across from me. She reached for my hand, but I kept both of mine wrapped around the coffee mug she slid in front of me. The mug was warm. I stared into the black liquid like it might have answers. I went to the pharmacy, I said finally. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Roy Abernathy was working the counter. I told her everything. The way Roy had leaned in, the computer screen, the prescription records, the allergy medication and sleeping pills, that had been picked up in Sophie's name every single month for the last 20 months. The death certificate that didn't look right. The seal. The signature. The quiet way Roy had said, "Something doesn't add up." Ellen's hands started to tremble. She pressed them flat against the table like she was trying to hold the world steady. "But we saw her, Ellen," she whispered, "at the funeral home. We identified her." "Did we?" The words came out sharper than I meant them to. I softened my tone. "We saw a closed casket. Marcus said she wouldn't have wanted people looking at her like that. Remember? He handled all the paperwork. He told us it was better this way. We only got 4 minutes in that viewing room before you broke down and we had to leave." 4 minutes. Ellen. She stared at me, eyes wide and wet. I watched the memory play across her face, the same way it was playing across mine. The sterile smell of the funeral home. The soft lighting. The way Marcus had stood between us. And the casket. Like a shield. The way he'd kept repeating, "She's at peace now. She's at peace." Ellen's voice cracked. "He said the casket had to stay closed. Cardiac arrest." He said her face was swollen. He was trying to protect us. Or he was hiding something. The words hung between us like smoke. Ellen pushed her chair back and stood up. She walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, then turned it off again, without doing anything. She did that twice. Her shoulders were shaking. I stayed at the table. My own eyes were dry. That scared me more than anything. Alan Whitaker, the man who cried at insurance commercials and at the end of nature documentaries about sea turtles, couldn't squeeze out a single tear right now. Something inside me had shifted from grief into something colder, something harder. We only saw her for those 4 minutes. I said again, quieter this time. Marcus arranged the whole thing. The paperwork, the death certificate, the insurance claim. He even picked out the plot at the cemetery. We trusted him because he was her husband. Because what kind of monster lies about their own wife being dead? Ellen turned around slowly. Tears were running down her face now. But her jaw was set the way it gets when she's fighting mad and trying not to show it. "You think he faked it," she said. "It wasn't a question. I don't know what I think yet. But 20 months of prescriptions don't lie. Roy saw the records himself. Someone has been using Sophie's insurance card like she's still walking around Columbus, buying allergy pills and sleeping medication." Ellen sank back into her chair. She looked smaller somehow, like the last 2 years had finally caught up to her all at once. "The grave," she whispered. "Every Sunday. The flowers. The prayers." Her voice broke completely. I reached across the table and took her hand this time. Her fingers were ice cold. We sat like that for a long time, the kitchen clock ticking louder than it had any right to. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked and a car drove past playing music too loud. Normal life going on while ours quietly unraveled. Finally, I said the words I'd been turning over in my head the entire drive home. "I'm calling Terrence." Ellen looked up. "Terrence Walsh?" I nodded. "Retired Columbus PD. 26 years on the force. The kind of man who spoke in short sentences and had seen enough of human nature to stay permanently unimpressed. He'd been my fishing buddy for 15 years. He was the only person I trusted to look at this without letting emotion cloud the facts. Ellen didn't argue. She just squeezed my hand tighter and said, "Do it." I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Terrence's name for a second. Once I made this call, there was no going back. No pretending the prescriptions were a computer glitch. No pretending the death certificate was just a paperwork error. No pretending the grave we visited every Sunday was anything more than a patch of grass covering up a lie. I pressed call. Terrence picked up on the second ring. "Alan, you never call on a Friday morning." "What's wrong?" I told him everything. The pharmacy, the prescriptions, the death certificate, the closed casket, the $600 I'd been handing Marcus every week. Like clockwork. I kept my voice steady, but my free hand was gripping the edge of the table so hard the wood groaned. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Terrence said, "How much money total?" I did the math out loud for the first time. 52 weeks times 2 years times 600. $62,400. Another pause. Longer this time. "Alan," he said, voice low and flat, "what you just described isn't just suspicious. It has a name. Several names, actually. And none of them are good." I looked across the table at Ellen. She was watching me, eyes red but steady now, like she was ready for whatever came next. Terrence kept talking. "Don't call Marcus. Don't tip him off. I know a guy at the county registrar's office who owes me a favor. I'll make some calls. You sit tight. I'll get back to you in an hour." I thanked him and hung up. Ellen reached for the tissue box and blew her nose. "What do we do until then?" I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at our quiet street. The cash envelope was still in my jacket by the door. $62,400 of my money sitting in Marcus's pocket while my daughter's prescriptions kept getting filled like she was still alive. I turned back to Ellen. "We wait," I said. "But when Terrence calls back, I'm not waiting anymore." For the first time in 2 years, the grief in my chest felt different. It felt like it had teeth. Terrence had told me to sit tight. He had a guy at the registrar's office. He'd make calls. He'd get back to me in an hour, but an hour felt like a lifetime, when every second was another $600 I'd already given away. I looked across the kitchen table at Ellen. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but steady now, the way they get when she's made up her mind about something. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and felt the weight of the cash envelope still inside the pocket. $62,400. Blood money, maybe. I couldn't sit here waiting for Terrence's report while Marcus went about his Friday like nothing was wrong. "I'm going to follow him," I told her. Ellen's mouth opened, then closed. She didn't argue. She just nodded once, sharp and final. "Be careful, Alan, and call me the second you know anything." I kissed her forehead, the same spot I'd kissed for 34 years, and walked out the door before I could talk myself out of it. Marcus's apartment was on the edge of Short North, one of those converted warehouses turned trendy lofts with exposed brick and too much glass. I parked half a block away behind a delivery van, killed the engine, and slouched low in the seat like some second-rate private eye. I'm a 60-year-old bookstore owner who still uses a flip phone for emergencies. The last time I followed anyone, it was a food truck selling jerk chicken. This was different. This was personal. The clock on the dash read 11:47. Marcus usually left around noon on Fridays to run errands before I showed up with the money. I waited. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel. Every car that passed made my pulse jump. I kept replaying Roy's whisper in my head, the way his voice had dropped like he was afraid the walls could hear. At 12:03, the door to the building opened. Marcus stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, in a gray hoodie and jeans, keys jingling in his hand. He looked normal, relaxed, like a man with nothing to hide, and a steady income from his dead father-in-law. He climbed into his silver Honda Accord, the one I'd helped pay for without knowing it, and pulled out of the lot. I waited 3 seconds, then followed. Columbus traffic swallowed us up. I kept 2 cars between us, the way Terrence had once described during a long fishing trip story I'd only half listened to. Thank God for that half. Marcus headed east on 5th, then cut north toward the river. The streets grew quieter as we left the trendy shops behind. Trees arched over the road, their leaves burning red and gold in the weak October sun. My heart hammered so loud I could hear it over the radio. We crossed the railroad tracks and the neighborhood changed again. Older houses, bigger lots, the kind of place where people actually know their neighbors. Marcus turned onto a narrow street that hugged the Scioto River, high in court. I'd never been out here before. The houses were small but well kept, tucked behind mature oaks that made the whole block feel deliberately hidden from the rest of the city. He slowed. I eased off the gas and let another car slip between us. Marcus pulled into the driveway of a pale yellow ranch house at number 14. No fence, just a neat lawn and a single carport. He didn't knock, he used a key. The door opened, and he disappeared inside like he belonged there. I parked half a block down, half hidden behind a big blue pickup. My mouth had gone dry. A man who knocks is a visitor. A man who uses a key lives there, or has been living there long enough that the difference doesn't matter anymore. I sat there for what felt like forever, eyes locked on the front window. The curtains were thin, the kind you can see movement through if the light is right. My phone buzzed. Terrence. I silenced it. Not yet. I needed to see this with my own eyes first. The minutes stretched. 10. 15. I thought about Sophie's laugh, the way she used to push her hair back with her left hand when she was thinking hard. I thought about the closed casket, and the way Marcus had stood between us and the truth. My stomach twisted so tight I had to breathe through my mouth. Then the front window lit up, someone turning on a lamp inside even though it was still daylight. A silhouette moved across the curtain. A woman, tall, slender, the same tilt of the head I had watched for 30 years. She reached up, pushed her hair back with her left hand, exactly the way Sophie used to do it when she was tired or thinking. Every hair on my arms stood straight up. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. It couldn't be. It couldn't. But the shape, the movement, the casual way she walked through that room like she'd done it 1,000 times, it was burned into my memory the way only a parent's memory can burn. Sophie, my daughter, alive, moving around a kitchen in a pale yellow house on a quiet street while I had spent 2 years putting flowers on an empty grave and handing her husband $600 every Friday like a fool. My phone buzzed again. Terrence. I ignored it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the damn thing. I stared at that window until my eyes burned. The silhouette passed again, closer to the glass this time. She paused, turned slightly, and for one impossible second, the light caught the side of her face just enough. It was her. I knew it in my bones the way I knew my own name. Across town, Ellen was waiting for me to call. Terrence was probably already on his way. But right now, in this moment, parked on a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio, the only thing I could do was sit there and feel my entire world split cleanly in two. Grief and fury and something that felt dangerously close to joy crashed together in my chest like a train wreck with no survivors. The grave was empty, and my daughter was standing 20 yards away, living a life I wasn't supposed to know about. My phone was buzzing like an angry hornet in my lap. Terrence's name lit up the screen for the 3rd time. I ignored it again and dialed Ellen instead. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the damn thing twice before I got it right. She answered on the first ring. Alan? Are you okay? You've been gone for over an hour. I tried to speak. The words stuck in my throat like dry bread. I swallowed hard, stared at that pale yellow house through the windshield, and finally forced them out. Ellen, she's alive. Silence on the other end. Then a sound I will never forget as long as I live, half gasp, half sob. The kind of noise a mother makes when the world she's built her life around suddenly flips upside down. I could hear her breathing fast and shallow, like she'd just run up a flight of stairs. What are you talking about? She whispered. Alan, don't do this to me. I'm sitting outside a house on High-End Court by the Scioto River. Marcus just walked in with a key. And I saw her, Ellen. I saw her silhouette through the front window. The way she tilts her head, the way she pushes her hair back with her left hand. It's Sophie. She's moving around inside that house like she's lived there for months. Ellen started crying for real now. Not the quiet tears she'd been shedding for 2 years. These were loud, raw, the kind that come from somewhere deeper than grief. You're sure? You're absolutely sure? I'd know her anywhere, I said, my own voice cracking. She's alive. She's been alive this whole time. The phone went quiet again except for her breathing. I could picture her standing in our kitchen, one hand pressed to her chest, the other gripping the counter so she wouldn't fall. My own chest felt like it was being squeezed by a giant fist. Grief, fury, relief, and a wild, terrifying hope, all fighting for space at the same time. Terrence's call came through again on the other line. I switched over without hanging up on Ellen. "Alan, where the hell are you?" Terrence's voice was sharp, no nonsense. "I told you to sit tight. I'm on Heian Court. Number 14. Marcus is inside. And Terrence, I saw Sophie. She's alive." A long pause. Then Terrence exhaled like a man who'd just been told the sky was green. "The registrar just confirmed it. The death certificate is fraudulent. Wrong seal. Wrong signature format. The whole thing was slapped together by someone who didn't know what they were doing, or didn't care because they figured no one would ever look twice. Alan, do not get out of that car. I'm already on my way. GPS says 12 minutes. 12 minutes felt like 12 years. I switched back to Ellen and told her Terrence was coming. She was still crying, but there was steel in her voice now too. "I'm putting on my coat. I'm coming to you." "No," I said quickly. "Stay home. I don't know what we're walking into yet. Just stay on the phone with me until Terrence gets here." So we waited together on the line. I described everything I could see. The pale yellow siding, the single carport, the blue flicker of a television through the curtains, the way the river glinted cold and gray behind the house. Ellen kept asking the same questions over and over, her voice small and fierce at the same time. Did she look okay? Was she smiling? Did she look scared? I answered what I could, my eyes never leaving that front window. 7 minutes later, Terrence's old black pickup rolled up behind me. He parked, killed the engine, and walked over to my window like he was approaching a crime scene. He took one look at my face and said, "Jesus, Alan, you look like you've seen a ghost." "She's not a ghost," I said. My voice sounded raw. "She's in there." Terrence glanced at the house, then back at me. He'd brought a small folder, probably the registrar's notes. His jaw was tight, the way it gets when he's in cop mode even though he's been retired for years. "I confirmed the certificate on the way over," he said quietly. "It's fake. Good enough to fool a grieving family, but not good enough to survive real scrutiny. Insurance payout, the whole thing. It's all built on a lie. But we do this smart, no hero stuff. We knock, we talk, and we get answers. You ready?" I looked at the house again. The silhouette had passed the window once more. My daughter, my Sophie, alive and breathing and hiding from me for 2 years while I paid her husband to keep the lie alive. I nodded. "I'm ready." Terrence rested a heavy hand on my shoulder for a second, the closest thing to a hug the man ever gave. "Then let's go get some answers." We started walking up the driveway together, 2 old men on a quiet Columbus street in October, the river murmuring behind us like it knew secrets too. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the ground itself was trying to hold me back. But I kept walking, because somewhere inside that pale yellow house was my daughter. And after 2 years of flowers on an empty grave, I was finally going to look her in the eye and ask her why. We reached the front porch of the pale yellow house. The wooden steps creaked under our boots. Terrence stopped for half a second, gave me one hard look and said, "Let me do the talking first, Alan. You hear me?" I nodded, but my jaw was locked, so tight it hurt. My heart was slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. The river behind the house whispered in the background, cold and steady, like it knew every secret this place was hiding. Terrence raised his fist and knocked 3 sharp professional knocks that said, "Someone who knows things is on the other side of this door." Inside, we heard movement. Quick footsteps. Low voices rushing to recalibrate. A chair scraped. Then silence. the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. The door opened. Marcus stood there in a gray hoodie and bare feet, holding a coffee mug like it was a shield. The second he saw me, the color drained from his face in one clean sweep. He looked at Terrence, then back at me, and whatever story he'd been preparing dissolved behind his eyes. "Alan," he said, voice cracking on the first syllable. This isn't really a good time." I stepped forward before Terrence could speak. My voice came out low, calm, the same tone I used when I coached Little League and a kid struck out with the bases loaded. "Move, Marcus." It wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout. It was the voice of a man who had coached teenagers, buried his daughter, written $62,400 in checks to a lie, and had finally run completely out of patience. Marcus moved. We stepped into the living room. It was comfortable. Lived in. 2 coffee mugs on the table. A throw blanket crumpled on the couch the way it gets when someone was just sitting under it a minute ago. Photographs on the shelf had been turned face down in a hurry. I could see the edges still sticking up. Women's shoes by the door. Size 7. Sophie's size. I stood in the middle of the room and said it loud enough for every corner of that house to hear. "Sophie, come out here, please." The words hung in the air. Marcus's mug started to tremble in his hand. He set it down fast, coffee sloshing over the rim. Terrence spoke next. Quieter but firm. The retired cop voice that still carried weight. "Sophie, my name is Terrence Walsh. I'm a friend of your father's and a retired Columbus PD officer. Nobody is here to hurt you, but this conversation is happening today, whether you come out or not." A door down the hallway clicked open. Footsteps. Slow. Hesitant. She stepped into the living room wearing a green cardigan I had never seen before over a white t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. Her face, God. Her face carried an expression I had never seen in 30 years of watching her grow up. Terror. Relief. Guilt. All of it layered so thick it looked like it might crack her open. She looked at me. I looked at her. For 2 full seconds the whole world stopped. Then she said the first words my daughter had spoken to me in 2 years. "Daddy, I can explain." In 31 years, every single time Sophie Whitaker had said the words, "I can explain," she could not, in fact, explain. The time she came home at 2 a.m. when she was 17, the time she rear-ended my car in the driveway, the woman had a perfect record of being unable to explain anything she'd ever needed to explain. But right now I didn't care. I crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into my arms. She was real. Warm. Breathing. Her shoulders shook against my chest the way they used to when she was little and had a nightmare. I held her so tight. I was probably hurting her. But I couldn't let go. 2 years of Sundays at an empty grave. 2 years of flowers and prayers and wondering what I had done wrong as a father. All of it crashed into this one moment. Sophie buried her face in my shoulder and started sobbing. The sound tore something loose inside my chest. I felt Terrence and Marcus watching us, but I didn't care. This was my daughter. My living, breathing daughter, who had let me grieve her like she was gone forever. I held her for a long time. Neither of us spoke. The only sounds were her crying and the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the river outside doing what rivers do, keeping secrets and moving on. Finally, I pulled back just enough to look at her face. Tears streaked her cheeks. Her eyes were the same hazel as her mother's, but right now they were wide and scared and full of something that looked a lot like shame. I cupped her face with both hands, the way I used to when she was 5 and had scraped her knee. Then I said the only thing that mattered in that moment. "When we get home, you are going to sit across from your mother at our kitchen table, and you are going to look her in the eye, and you are going to explain every single thing. Not to me, to her. Do you understand?" Sophie nodded, still crying, her whole body trembling. I stepped back but kept one hand on her shoulder like I was afraid she might disappear again if I let go. Marcus was staring at the floor, shoulders slumped. the fight gone out of him completely. Terrence cleared his throat. "We're going to sit down now," he said, voice steady. "And we're going to talk. All of us, right here, right now." Sophie looked up at me one more time, eyes pleading. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt something besides grief. I felt hope, but hope with teeth. Because whatever explanation was coming next, it had better be good enough to make up for 2 years of Sundays at an empty grave. Sophie sat down on the edge of the couch like she was afraid the cushions might swallow her whole. Her hands twisted in her lap, knuckles white. Marcus stayed standing by the window, staring at the river like it could wash away what was coming. Terrence and I took the 2 armchairs facing them. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with everything that had been unsaid for 2 years. Sophie drew a shaky breath and started talking. The words came out in pieces. The way confessions always do, not clean and straight, but jagged, circling back, filled with long pauses, where the tears took over. "Daddy, it wasn't supposed to be like this. At first, Marcus was good to me. Really good. He made me laugh. He remembered little things, my favorite coffee order, the way I liked the pillows arranged. When we got married, I thought I'd won the lottery." She glanced at Marcus for the first time. He didn't meet her eyes, but 2 years in, everything changed. The company he worked for started cutting corners. Then they started cutting people. Marcus lost his job. We were already stretched thin because of the wedding and the apartment. He started borrowing money from people he shouldn't have borrowed from. Her voice dropped. "Not banks, not family. People who don't send polite letters when you miss a payment." I felt my stomach tighten. Terrence leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, listening the way cops listen when they know the story is about to get ugly. Sophie wiped her eyes with the sleeve of the green cardigan. It started small, a few thousand here and there. Then Marcus got pulled into something bigger, a group moving things through Ohio. Electronics, prescription drugs, sometimes worse. They needed someone who knew logistics, someone who looked clean on paper. Marcus thought he could handle it. Make one big score, pay everything off and walk away. But you don't just walk away from these people. She swallowed hard. 3 men showed up at our apartment one night. It was late. I was already in bed. I heard the knocking. Not normal knocking. Heavy. Like they wanted us to know they could break the door if they wanted. Marcus tried to keep me in the bedroom, but I came out anyway. One of them had a bat. Another had a knife. He didn't even bother hiding. They laid it out. Clear. The debt had grown to over 200,000. They wanted it in 30 days, or they'd take it out of us. Literally. Sophie's hands started shaking again. I had to fight the urge to cross the room and hold her. Part of me still wanted to protect her. The other part, the colder part that had been paying Marcus for 2 years, needed to hear every single word. They made it very clear what would happen if we didn't pay. She whispered. They described it in detail. What they'd do to me first so Marcus would watch. Then what they'd do to him. I've never been so scared in my life, Daddy. Not even when I was little and thought monsters lived under the bed. These were real monsters. And they knew where we lived. Marcus finally spoke, voice hoarse. I tried to fix it. I swear I did. But the more I tried, the deeper it got. Sophie shook her head. That's when the idea came up. The plan. It wasn't mine. It was his. Fake my death. Collect the life insurance. Use the money to pay the debt. Then disappear. Start over somewhere they couldn't find us. He said it was the only way we'd ever be free. She looked straight at me then, eyes pleading. I fought him on it at first. I told him it was insane, that we'd get caught, that Mom and you would never recover. But those men kept calling, kept texting pictures of our building, our car, even a photo of me at the grocery store. They were watching us. Every day. I started having panic attacks. Couldn't sleep. That's when the sleeping pills started. Then one night, I found out I was pregnant. 3 weeks along. I hadn't even told Marcus yet. I was terrified the baby would grow up without parents if those men came for us. The room went completely still. Even Terrence didn't move. Sophie's voice cracked. I was so scared for the baby, Daddy. I thought, if I was gone, at least the insurance money would protect the child. Marcus said, we could fake the death certificate. He knew someone who could make it look real enough. We'd use a Jane Doe from the county morgue. Someone with no family. Dress her up, make the identification quick. Closed casket. Quick funeral. Then I'd disappear and we'd start over under new names. The insurance payout would clear the debt and give us a fresh start. He swore it would work. He swore no one would ever know. She stopped. The silence pressed down on all of us like a weight. I sat there, 60 years old, bookstore owner, father, and felt every single one of those years in my bones. My daughter, my bright, stubborn, laughing Sophie, had been carrying this for 2 years. While I put flowers on a grave that wasn't hers, while Ellen cried herself to sleep, while I handed Marcus $600 every Friday like a good, grieving father. Sophie's eyes were wide, waiting for me to explode. To yell. To call her a monster. But I didn't yell. I just asked one quiet question. So you agreed to let your mother identify a stranger's body as yours? Sophie flinched like I'd slapped her. And that was the moment I realized the confession wasn't over yet. Sophie flinched like I'd raised my hand, which I have never done and would never do. But the truth landed on her exactly like that. She looked down at her hands, then back up at me. Tears streaming freely now. It wasn't my body, she whispered. Marcus arranged everything. He knew a guy through the syndicate, someone who worked the county morgue night shift. There was a Jane Doe, no family, no ID, about my height, same build. They dressed her in my clothes. Marcus took care of the paperwork at the funeral home. He told the director it had to be a closed casket because of the way I looked after the cardiac arrest. He said it was too traumatic for you and Mom to see. He handled the death certificate. He paid extra to make sure the seal looked official enough for a grieving family that wasn't looking for fraud. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I was already here. In this house. The same day you were at the funeral home identifying a stranger, I was sitting in that back bedroom with the curtains drawn, listening to the river and throwing up because I was so terrified. I heard the service on a live stream Marcus recorded on his phone. I heard Mom crying. I heard you trying to hold it together when you spoke at the grave. I wanted to scream through the phone. I wanted to run to you. But those men were still out there. They were watching the apartment. They were watching the funeral. If I showed up alive, they would have come for all of us. Marcus finally spoke. His voice rough and broken. I thought I was protecting her. Protecting the baby. I told her it was the only way. The insurance payout came through 2 weeks later. $250,000, enough to clear the debt and give us a little to start over. I paid the syndicate in cash the next day. They left us alone. For the first time in months, no more threats. No more late-night knocks. It worked. For a while. Sophie shook her head slowly, but it never felt right. Every time I saw a picture of you two on social media, you at the bookstore, Mom planting flowers at the cemetery, it felt like I was dying all over again. I kept the sleeping pills going because the guilt wouldn't let me sleep. I kept the allergy meds because the stress made my body react like I was allergic to my own life. I stayed hidden. I didn't leave the house for the first 6 months. Marcus brought everything. Groceries, prenatal vitamins, everything. I gave birth here. In the back bedroom. With only a midwife, he paid off the books. Our son is 18 months old now. You have a grandson, Daddy. His name is Lucas. The room spun. A grandson. I had a grandson. I had never met, because my daughter had let me bury her. Sophie kept going, the words spilling faster now, like she was afraid she'd lose the courage if she stopped. We changed our last name. I became Emma Caldwell. Marcus told everyone at the new job that his wife had passed away. Two different story, different state. We kept the yellow house because it was quiet and off the radar. I watched from the window every time Marcus went to meet you with the money. I saw you hand him that envelope every Friday. I cried every single time. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself one day the heat would die down and I could come back. But the longer it went on, the harder it got to imagine walking into your kitchen and saying, "Surprise, I'm alive." She looked at me then. Really looked at me. Her eyes full of the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during Sunday football. I was so scared, Daddy. Scared of those men. Scared of losing the baby. Scared of what you and Mom would think of me. Every time I almost picked up the phone, I pictured Mom's face at the funeral. I pictured you standing at the grave, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't break your hearts twice. Terrence cleared his throat. His voice was calm, but edged with steel. What you two did is fraud. Insurance fraud. Falsifying official documents. Obtaining money under false pretenses. The fact that we're sitting here having this conversation instead of waiting for squad cars is entirely because of the man sitting across from you. But make no mistake, this gets resolved legally. Today, the insurance money gets returned. Every dollar Alan gave you gets documented and repaid. You will cooperate fully, and if either of you even think about disappearing before this is handled, I will make one phone call and you will not enjoy what follows. Marcus nodded, small and defeated. A man who had run a con so long he'd forgotten it had to end. I stood up slowly. My legs felt heavy, but steady. I looked at my daughter, the woman I had mourned. The woman whose absence had added 10 years to my face and taken something from Ellen no counselor could ever fully restore. She was looking at me like she was waiting for a verdict. I walked across the room and pulled her into my arms again. She shook against me. I held her because she was my daughter, because she was alive, because 2 years of grief will make even a wronged man choose presence over pride when presence suddenly, miraculously appears again. I stepped back, held her at arm's length, and looked her straight in the eyes. "You still have to face your mother," I said quietly. "Today. Right now. You are going to sit across from her at our kitchen table and tell her everything you just told me. Not to me. To her. Do you understand?" Sophie nodded, tears falling freely. I picked up my keys from the coffee table. I looked at Marcus one last time. "Terrence will handle the rest with you. I have nothing else to say to you right now. The things I actually want to say aren't appropriate for this living room." Terrence gave a short cough that might have been a laugh. I took Sophie's hand and led her toward the door. The river outside sounded different now, not cold and secretive, but steady, like it was ready to carry us forward. The grave was still empty, but my daughter was walking beside me, and somewhere across Columbus, Ellen was about to get the phone call that would change everything all over again. Sophie's hand was cold in mine as we stepped out of the pale yellow house and into the October afternoon. The river behind us kept murmuring, indifferent to the earthquake that had just happened inside those walls. Marcus stayed behind with Terrence. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not yet. We walked to my car in silence. Sophie slid into the passenger seat, like she was afraid the seatbelt might bite her. I started the engine. The heater kicked on, blowing warm air across our faces, but it didn't touch the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I pulled out my phone. Ellen answered before the first ring finished. "Alan?" Her voice was tight, stretched thin like a wire about to snap. "Tell me what's happening. I've been losing my mind here." I took a breath that felt too big for my chest. Sophie was watching me, eyes wide and terrified, her fingers twisting the hem of that green cardigan. "Ellen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Put on your coat." A pause. Then a small, broken sound. Half laugh. Half sob. "Why, Alan? What is this? You've been gone for hours. I've been sitting here staring at the kitchen table like it's going to give me answers." I looked at Sophie for a split second. She was biting her lip so hard I thought it might bleed. "There's someone I need you to see," I said. The line went quiet again. I could hear Ellen moving, the soft rustle of her coat being pulled from the hook by the door, the jingle of her keys. When she spoke again, her voice was so small it almost disappeared. "Is it her?" I didn't answer with words. Some answers don't need them. I just said, "Put on your coat, Ellen. I'm coming to get you." I hung up before either of us could fall apart on the phone. Sophie let out a shaky breath beside me. "Mom's going to hate me." "She's not going to hate you," I said, pulling away from the curb. "She's going to love you so hard it hurts." That's what mothers do. The drive back through Columbus felt both endless and too short. We passed the short north shops, the brick streets of German Village, the familiar corners where Sophie used to ride her bike and later drive her first car. Every block brought back memories I'd tried to bury with her. Sophie stayed quiet, staring out the window, occasionally wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the console between us, close enough that she could reach for it if she needed to. My phone buzzed twice. Terrence updating me that he and Marcus were handling the immediate legal side. I didn't read the messages. Not yet. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the woman waiting for us on Mohawk Street. When we turned onto our block, Ellen was already standing on the front porch in her navy coat, arms wrapped around herself like she was holding her own pieces together. The second she saw my car, she started walking down the steps, fast, almost running. I pulled up to the curb. Sophie froze in the passenger seat, breath caught. Ellen reached the car door before I could even shift into park. She looked through the windshield, straight at Sophie, and the world seemed to stop. For one long second, nothing moved. Then Ellen's hand flew to her mouth. A sound came out of her raw primal, the sound of a mother who had buried her child and was suddenly staring at her alive in the front seat of her husband's car. Tears spilled down her face instantly. I got out and opened Sophie's door. My daughter stepped onto the sidewalk on legs that looked ready to give out. Ellen didn't wait. She closed the distance in 3 strides and pulled Sophie into her arms so hard I heard the breath leave both of them. They stood there on the sidewalk in German Village, 2 women I loved more than anything, holding each other like the rest of the world had disappeared. I stood a few feet away, watching, my own eyes burning. Neighbors were probably watching from their windows. I didn't care. Let them watch. Let the whole damn street see what a miracle looks like. Ellen pulled back just enough to cup Sophie's face with both hands, the same way I had done earlier. She searched her daughter's eyes like she was making sure this was real and not some cruel dream she'd wake up from. "My baby," she whispered, voice breaking. "My baby girl." Sophie started crying again, harder this time. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Ellen shook her head, tears streaming. "Not now. Not here on the sidewalk. We're going to do this right. At our kitchen table, the way your father said." She looked over at me, eyes shining with something fierce and tender at the same time. "You found her." "I found her," I said. Ellen reached out and squeezed my hand once, hard, before turning back to Sophie. "Get in the car, sweetheart. We're all going back together." Sophie climbed into the back seat this time. Ellen got in the front passenger side. I slid behind the wheel, feeling, for the first time in 2 years, like the car was carrying something whole again instead of 3 broken pieces. We drove back toward High Court in silence, broken only by soft sniffles and the low hum of the heater. No one spoke much. There would be time for words, hours, days, maybe years of words. Right now the silence felt necessary, like the quiet before a storm finally breaks and the rain can finally fall. As we turned onto the narrow street by the river, the pale yellow house came into view again. Terrence's truck was still parked out front. Marcus's Honda was still in the driveway. I pulled up behind Terrence's truck and killed the engine. Ellen turned in her seat to look at Sophie in the back. She reached back and took her daughter's hand. "You ready?" she asked softly. Sophie nodded, though her face said she was anything but ready. I looked at the house, then at my wife, then at my daughter in the rearview mirror. The grave was empty. But right here, in this car, on this quiet Columbus street, Our family was full again for the first time in 2 years. Ellen took a deep breath, squared her shoulders the way she does before she argues with a stop sign, and reached for the door handle. "Let's go inside," she said. Ellen reached for the door handle of the pale yellow house like it was made of glass. Her hand hovered for half a second, then closed around it. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Sophie. She just pushed the door open and stepped inside. I followed right behind her, Sophie at my side. The living room smelled the same as it had an hour ago, coffee and faint river air and something like fear. Marcus was gone. Terrence must have taken him somewhere to talk. The 2 coffee mugs were still on the table. The blanket still crumpled on the couch. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. Ellen stopped in the middle of the room. Sophie stood frozen 3 feet behind her. For one long, unbearable second, nothing moved except the curtains stirring in the breeze from the open door. Then Ellen turned. Their eyes met. The sound that came out of my wife was not a word. It wasn't even a sob. It was something older. Something deeper, the sound a mother makes when the child she buried walks back into her life, wearing a green cardigan. And tears. It started low in her chest and rose until it filled the entire room. Raw and broken, and impossibly alive. "Sophie?" The name came out like a prayer and a question and a scream all at once. Sophie's face crumpled. "Mum." Ellen crossed the distance in 2 strides and wrapped her arms around our daughter so tightly I heard the breath leave Sophie's lungs. They clung to each other like people drowning who had suddenly found the same piece of wood. Ellen's hands moved over Sophie's back. Her hair, her shoulders checking, reassuring, making sure this was real. Sophie buried her face in her mother's neck the way she used to when she was 5 and the thunder scared her. I stood there watching, my own throat so tight I couldn't swallow. 34 years of marriage, and I had never heard Ellen make that sound before. Not when we lost Sophie. Not at the funeral. Not in any of the nights she cried herself to sleep thinking I was already asleep. This sound was different. This was the sound of a heart that had been broken and was now being put back together all at once. "My baby," Ellen kept whispering over and over, her voice muffled against Sophie's hair. "My baby girl. You're here. You're really here." Sophie was crying so hard her whole body shook. "I'm sorry. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I was scared. I was so scared." Ellen pulled back just enough to look at her daughter's face. She cupped Sophie's cheeks with both hands, thumbs brushing away tears, the way she used to when Sophie came home from school with a scraped knee. Her own face was wet, mascara running, but her eyes were fierce with love. "You're alive," she said, like she still couldn't believe the words. "You're standing right here, breathing, warm, my Sophie." Sophie tried to speak but only managed another sob. She leaned forward again and pressed her forehead to her mother's. They stayed like that, forehead to forehead, breathing the same air, 2 hearts that had been ripped apart, finally beating in the same room again. I felt my own eyes burning. I didn't wipe the tears away. I let them fall. After 2 years of being the strong one, the one who held Ellen when she cried, the one who drove to the cemetery every Sunday and pretended the grave made sense, I finally let myself feel it. Ellen looked over Sophie's shoulder at me. Her eyes were shining with something I can't even name. Gratitude, pain, joy, relief, all tangled together. She reached out one hand without letting go of our daughter. I took it. The 3 of us stood there in a clumsy, tear-soaked circle in the middle of a stranger's living room. No one spoke for a long time. There were no words big enough. Only the sound of crying and breathing, and the river outside doing what rivers do, carrying things away and bringing new things in. Eventually, Ellen pulled back again, but she kept one arm around Sophie's waist, like she was afraid the girl might vanish if she let go. She looked at me, then at Sophie, then back at me. "Kitchen table," she said, voice hoarse but steady. Our kitchen table. That's where this conversation finishes. Not here. At home. Where we belong. Sophie nodded, still crying quietly. I'll tell you everything. I promise. No more lies. No more hiding. Ellen kissed her daughter's forehead, long and slow, the way she used to when Sophie was little and had a fever. Then, she looked at me again. Take us home, Ellen. I nodded. My voice still wasn't working right, so I just squeezed her hand once. We walked out of the pale yellow house together, wife, daughter, husband, the October wind catching our coats as we stepped onto the porch. The river kept whispering behind us. The sun was lower now, painting the water gold and red. Ellen kept her arm around Sophie the entire walk to the car. Sophie leaned into her mother like she was drawing strength from the only place she had ever really known safety. I opened the back door for them. They climbed in together, still holding each other. I got behind the wheel and started the engine. As we pulled away from Heian Court, Ellen's voice came soft from the back seat. I love you, Sophie. Nothing you say in the next hour is going to change that. You hear me? Sophie's answer was barely a whisper. I hear you, Mom. The car rolled through the quiet Columbus streets, carrying 3 people who had been broken and were now slowly, painfully, miraculously beginning to heal. The grave was empty, but the car was full, and for the first time in 2 years that felt like enough. We drove straight home to Mohawk Street instead of staying at the yellow house. Ellen insisted, our kitchen table. She kept repeating quietly, like it was the only place in the world where this conversation could possibly happen. When we pulled into the driveway, the familiar brick house looked the same as it had that morning, lights on in the kitchen, the little wreath on the door, the same creak in the 3rd porch step, but everything felt different now. We sat down at the oak table where Sophie used to do her homework. Ellen made tea without being asked, 3 mugs, strong and sweet the way Sophie liked it when she was little. No one spoke while the kettle whistled. When we finally settled in our chairs, the silence felt sacred. Sophie wrapped both hands around her mug like it could anchor her. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but she looked straight at her mother. Mom, I don't even know where to start except to say I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I let you bury me. I'm sorry I let you stand at that grave every Sunday for 2 years. I'm sorry I made you think your daughter was gone. Ellen's hands trembled as she lifted her mug. But she didn't drink. She just held it and looked at Sophie with the kind of love that has been through hell and come out the other side. Tell me why, Ellen said. Her voice was quiet but steady. Not the fear, not the syndicate. I want to know why my daughter, the girl I carried for 9 months, the girl I taught to ride a bike on this very street, chose to let me identify a stranger's body as hers. Sophie's shoulders shook. She told her everything. The same story she had told me, but slower, gentler, like she was trying to soften every blow. The debts, the 3 men with the bat and the knife, the panic attacks, the night she found out she was pregnant and realized she couldn't bring a child into a world where monsters knew their address, the Jane Doe, the closed casket, the live stream of the funeral she had watched alone in the back bedroom while her own mother cried at the grave. I heard you, Mom, Sophie whispered. I heard you reading that poem at the service, the one about the light that never goes out. I sat on the floor and cried so hard I thought I would break, but I was convinced that if I came back, those men would come for all of us, for you, for Dad, for the baby. I thought I was protecting you by disappearing. Ellen closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, tears slipped down her cheeks, but her jaw was set the way it gets when she's fighting for her family. Do you know what I did every single night for 2 years? She asked. I sat right here at this table and blamed myself. I went over every meal I ever cooked, every time I raised my voice, every doctor appointment I might have missed. I convinced myself I had failed you somehow, that if I had been a better mother, your heart wouldn't have just stopped. Sophie reached across the table and grabbed her mother's hand. You didn't fail me. You never failed me. I failed you. I failed both of you. Ellen squeezed her daughter's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. I know you were scared. I know those men were monsters. But you are my daughter. You should have come to us. We would have sold this house, sold the bookstore, sold everything we own to protect you and that baby. That's what family does, Sophie. We don't disappear. We fight together. Sophie's tears fell onto the table. I know that now. I knew it then. But fear makes you stupid. It makes you believe the lie that you're protecting the people you love by breaking their hearts. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Ellen reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind Sophie's ear, the way she used to when Sophie was small. Her voice softened, but the steel stayed in it. I forgive you, she said. The words came out clear and certain. I forgive you because you're my child and you're alive, and that is the only thing that matters right now. But forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. Marcus has to answer for this. He has to answer to the insurance company. He has to answer to the law, and he has to answer to this family. He is not walking away from this like nothing happened. Sophie nodded quickly. He knows. Terrence already told him. We're going to return every penny of the insurance money. We're going to cooperate fully. Marcus is scared, but he's ready to face it. He knows he ruined everything. Ellen looked at me across the table. Our eyes met the way they have for 34 years, the silent conversation only old married couples can have. I gave her the smallest nod. Good, Ellen said, turning back to Sophie. Because this family is going to heal. Together. You're going to bring Lucas here. You're going to let your father and me meet our grandson. We're going to figure out the legal mess with Terrence's help. And then we're going to decide what the future looks like, all four of us. No more secrets. No more hiding. No more empty graves. Sophie started crying again. But this time, the tears looked different. Lighter somehow, like something heavy had finally been lifted off her chest. I want that more than anything, she whispered. I want my family back. Ellen pulled her chair closer and wrapped both arms around our daughter again. They stayed like that for a long time. Heads together, breathing together. The way they used to when Sophie was little and needed comfort after a bad dream. I watched them and felt the last piece of the wall inside my chest finally crumble. The grave was empty. But this kitchen table, the same one where we had celebrated birthdays and argued over curfews and cried over report cards, was full again. And for the first time in 2 years, the future didn't feel like something we had to survive. It felt like something we could build. The next morning, the sun rose over German Village the same way it always had, painting the brick sidewalks in soft gold and turning the fallen leaves into scattered flames of red and orange. But this morning felt completely different. The air carried a lightness I hadn't felt in 2 years, like the whole neighborhood knew something miraculous had happened and was holding its breath in quiet celebration. We chose the small outdoor cafe on the corner of Mohawk and 3rd Street. The one with the checkered tablecloths, the best blueberry muffins in Columbus, and a view of the quiet, tree-lined street. Ellen had suggested it. Neutral ground, she said softly over breakfast. A place where we can talk without the walls of that yellow house, or our own kitchen pressing down on us. I agreed. Some conversations needed open sky and fresh coffee to breathe. Sophie and Marcus arrived first. Sophie looked exhausted but lighter, as if 2 years of carrying a terrible secret had finally been lifted from her shoulders. She wore the same green cardigan from yesterday, but her posture was different. No longer hunched in shame, but tentative, hopeful. Marcus walked half a step behind her, eyes fixed on the ground, shoulders rounded like the weight of everything he had done was finally crushing him. He had spoken with Terrence early that morning. The first legal calls had already been made. The insurance company would be notified today. The repayment process had begun. No more delays. No more running. Ellen and I walked up the sidewalk together, her arm linked tightly through mine. The second she saw Sophie, Ellen pulled her daughter into a fierce hug right there on the sidewalk. not caring who might be watching from the cafe windows. No words were needed, just arms and quiet tears and the kind of embrace only a mother who had mourned her child for 2 years could give. Sophie melted into it, burying her face in her mother's shoulder the way she used to as a little girl. We took the corner table outside, the one shaded by an old maple tree. The waitress, a kind woman who had served us for years, brought coffee and a basket of warm muffins without asking questions. She simply smiled at the four of us with our red-rimmed eyes and shaky smiles, then left us in peace. Sophie spoke first, her voice still a little hoarse from yesterday's tears. I called the midwife this morning. Lucas is with her. She's bringing him over in about an hour. I want you both to meet your grandson. Ellen's hand flew to her mouth. Fresh tears welled up instantly. But these were different, bright, joyful, full of wonder. A grandson, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. We have a grandson. Oh, Sophie. I reached across the table and took my daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. We can't wait to meet him, sweetheart. Tell us about him. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice rough and low. I've already started the paperwork with Terrence. The insurance company will receive the full payout back within 30 days, every single cent. I'm cooperating completely. Whatever consequences come, I'll face them. I deserve them. Ellen studied him for a long moment across the table. Her eyes weren't soft, but they weren't filled with hatred either. There was steel there, the same steel that had carried her through 2 years of Sunday cemetery visits. You do deserve consequences, she said quietly but firmly. What you did to us, to Alan, to me, to our family was wrong on every level. But you also helped keep my daughter alive when real monsters were at your door. That doesn't excuse anything. But it does mean this family is choosing to move forward instead of tearing itself apart. Sophie nodded quickly, tears slipping down her cheeks again. We're selling the yellow house. We're moving back closer to you two. I want Lucas to grow up knowing his grandparents hearing stories about Dad's bookstore, about Mom's meatloaf that could win awards, about the Little League games, and the way you both used to dance in the kitchen on Friday nights. No more hiding. No more fake names. No more lies. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Real talk. Hard talk. We made lists on paper napkins, lawyer meetings, repayment schedule, how to carefully explain things to the few close friends and neighbors who needed to know without causing more pain. Terrence would handle the remaining syndicate details. The threats were already fading now that the debt had been paid and the police were quietly involved in the background. No more looking over our shoulders. No more living in fear. Ellen kept one hand on Sophie's arm the entire time, as if she still needed the constant physical reassurance that her daughter was truly there, warm and breathing beside her. Every few minutes she would reach over and gently brush a strand of hair behind Sophie's ear, the same tender gesture she had done since Sophie was a baby. Sophie leaned into every touch, drawing strength from it like a plant turning toward the sun. At one point, Sophie pulled out her phone and showed us the first clear picture of Lucas, a chubby-cheeked toddler with Sophie's hazel eyes and a smile that looked suspiciously like mine when I was his age. Ellen cried again, happy tears this time, tracing her finger across the screen as if she could already feel his little hand in hers. He has your nose, Alan, she said, laughing through the tears. I felt my own eyes sting as I looked at the photo of the grandson I never knew existed until yesterday. When the waitress returned to refill our coffees, she paused and smiled warmly at our little group. You folks look like you're celebrating something important today. Sophie glanced at me, then at her mother, then back at the waitress. A small, genuine smile broke across her face for the first time in a long while. We are, she said softly. We really are. After the plates were cleared, I stood up and pulled Sophie into my arms again. This hug was slower than the desperate ones from yesterday. It was surer, stronger, the hug of a father who had his daughter back and was never letting go again. I love you, kiddo, I whispered against her hair. Always have, always will, no matter what. I love you too, Dad, she whispered back, her voice cracking with the good kind of emotion. The kind that comes right before real healing begins. We walked out of the cafe together into the bright October morning. The leaves crunched pleasantly under our shoes. Ellen kept her arm linked tightly with Sophie's. Marcus walked quietly behind us, present but giving space where it was needed. For the first time in 2 long, painful years, the future didn't feel like something we had to survive. It felt like something we could finally build together, one honest day at a time. The grave was still empty, but our family was full again. And that was more than enough. It was everything. We were still sitting at the cafe table when Terrence's black pickup pulled up to the curb. He climbed out, folder in hand, and walked straight over like a man who had already mapped out the next 10 moves. The October sun caught the silver in his hair as he pulled up an extra chair and sat down without asking. The waitress brought him a black coffee without being told. She knew the look on his face. "Morning, folks," Terrence said, keeping his voice low so the couple at the next table wouldn't hear. "I've spent the last 2 hours on the phone with the county registrar, the insurance fraud unit, and a friend who still works organized crime. We're moving fast before anything else leaks." Sophie stiffened beside me. Ellen reached over and took her hand again, steady as always. Marcus stared into his coffee like it held all the answers he didn't want to face. Terrence opened the folder and slid a single sheet across the table. Columns of numbers, dates, official stamps. Here's the reality. The insurance company has already flagged the claim. They were waiting for the final payout paperwork, but the registrar's office just sent them the fraud alert. You've got 30 days to return the full $250,000 before they file criminal charges. Every dollar Alan gave you over the last 2 years will be documented as restitution. The court will want a full repayment schedule. Marcus nodded slowly, jaw tight. I'll sign whatever they need. Today, I'll sell the Honda, the house, everything. I don't care. Terrence looked at him the way a retired cop looks at someone who finally stopped running. Good. Because this isn't just about money. The syndicate you got mixed up with the group moving product through Ohio, they don't like loose ends. I ran the names you gave me. 2 of the 3 men who showed up at your apartment are still active. The 3rd is in county lockup on an unrelated charge, which is the only reason you haven't had visitors yet. But word travels. If they find out Sophie is alive and the insurance money is being clawed back, they might come looking for what they think they're owed. Sophie's breath caught. Ellen's grip on her daughter's hand tightened until her knuckles turned white. I felt that old cold feeling settle back in my chest, the same one that had hit me in the pharmacy 2 days ago. Terrence continued, voice calm but serious. We're going to handle this the right way. I've already spoken to a detective I trust. They're opening a quiet file. Sophie and Marcus will give full statements, names, dates, every threat, every payment. In return, they get protection. Witness security if it gets that bad. But the best protection right now is speed and honesty. The sooner the syndicate sees the money is gone and the authorities are involved, the sooner they lose interest. These groups don't waste time on broke targets. Marcus finally looked up. His eyes were red but clear for the first time since we'd knocked on that yellow door. I'll do it. All of it. Statements. Court. Whatever it takes. I dragged Sophie into this mess. I'm not dragging her or our son through any more of it. Tell me where to sign and when to show up. Terrence slid another paper across the table, a simple 1-page agreement he had already prepared. This is a formal cooperation letter. You sign it. I hand it to the detective this afternoon. It protects you from being charged as the primary fraud actor if you turn over everything. The insurance company will still want their money back, but the DA is willing to recommend leniency if you cooperate fully and show genuine remorse. Marcus didn't hesitate. He took the pen Terrence offered and signed his name in clear, steady strokes. When he finished, he slid the paper back and looked each of us in the eye. Me, Ellen, Sophie. I know sorry doesn't fix 2 years of hell, he said quietly, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. Starting today. Sophie reached over and covered his hand with hers for the first time since yesterday. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. Terrence closed the folder. One more thing. The syndicate still has eyes in this city. For the next few weeks, be careful. No social media posts about Sophie being back. No big family reunions announced online. Keep Lucas off the internet completely until we're sure the threat is dead. I've got a couple of off-duty friends who can sit on the house if you want extra eyes. Just say the word. Ellen spoke up, voice firm. We'll take the extra eyes. At least until the repayment is confirmed and the detective says it's safe. I'm not losing my daughter a second time. Terrence nodded once. The way old cops do when they hear the right answer. Smart. I'll set it up this afternoon. In the meantime, go meet that grandson of yours. Celebrate the good parts. The legal storm is coming, but you've got family on your side now. That counts for more than most people realize. He stood up, shook my hand. Then Ellen's. Then Sophie's. When he got to Marcus, he paused, gripping the younger man's shoulder hard enough to make him wince. You chose wrong once, Terrence said quietly. Don't choose wrong again. Marcus met his eyes. I won't. Terrence left the cafe the same way he arrived. No drama. Just purpose. The four of us sat there for a few more minutes in silence. The weight of the legal road ahead, settling over us, like the October chill. But underneath that weight was something new. Determination. Unity. The beginning of trust being rebuilt. One honest step at a time. Sophie looked at her mother. Then at me. We're really doing this. All of it. So. Ellen smiled, small but real. We're doing this together. I paid the bill and we stood up. The leaves crunched under our shoes as we walked back toward the car. Somewhere across town, a midwife was bringing a little boy named Lucas to meet his grandparents for the first time. The legal papers were signed. The repayment had begun. The syndicate's shadow was still there. But it was no longer the only thing in the picture. For the first time in 2 years, the future looked like something we could face head-on, not as broken pieces, but as a family that had stared into the empty grave and walked away whole again. We got back to the house on Mohawk Street, just as the afternoon light turned golden across the brick sidewalks. Lucas had arrived with the midwife a few minutes earlier. The little boy was sleeping peacefully in a portable crib we'd set up in the living room. His tiny fist curled near his cheek. Sophie stood over him like she was afraid to blink, while Ellen hovered close enough to touch his soft hair with trembling fingers. For a few minutes, the only sounds were quiet coos and the occasional sniffle as my wife and daughter met their grandson for the first time. But after the initial rush of wonder and tears, Ellen gently took Sophie's hand. Come with me, sweetheart, she said softly. Just us. Kitchen table again. There are still some things a mother needs to say to her daughter alone. Sophie glanced at me, eyes nervous but trusting. I gave her a small nod. This moment wasn't mine. It belonged to the two of them. I stayed in the living room, standing at the window that looked out onto the backyard. From there, I could see straight into the kitchen through the open archway. I didn't hide. I simply watched from a respectful distance, the same way I'd watch Sophie learn to ride her bike or walk down the aisle. Some things a father doesn't insert himself into. He just stands guard and lets healing happen. They sat at the old oak table again. Ellen poured 2 fresh cups of tea, the steam rising between them like a gentle curtain. Sophie wrapped both hands around her mug the way she used to when she was a teenager and needed courage to confess something small. This time the confession was anything but small. Ellen spoke first, her voice low and steady, the way it gets when she's choosing every word with care. I need you to hear this, Sophie. Not as my daughter right now, but as the woman you've become. For 2 years I woke up every single morning and blamed myself. I replayed every argument we ever had. Every time I pushed you too hard about your career. Every time I worried out loud that Marcus wasn't good enough for you. I convinced myself that if I had been softer, or stricter, or wiser, your heart wouldn't have stopped. I stood at that grave every Sunday and whispered to you that I was sorry I failed you. Sophie's shoulders started to shake. Ellen reached across the table and took both her hands. But yesterday, When I saw you standing in that living room, alive and breathing, something inside me cracked open. All that blame, all that guilt, it didn't disappear. It just changed shape. Because now I know the truth. You were scared. You were protecting your baby. You were trying to survive monsters I never even knew existed. And I'm angry at those monsters. I'm angry at Marcus. But mostly, I'm angry at the fear that made you believe disappearing was the only way to keep us safe. Sophie's tears fell freely onto the table. Mom, I was so wrong. I should have come to you. I should have trusted you and Dad to fight with me instead of trying to protect you by breaking your hearts. I listened to those men threaten us and I panicked. I let fear make the decision for me. I let it convince me that you would be safer thinking I was dead than knowing I was in danger. Ellen squeezed her daughter's hands tighter. Fear is a liar, Sophie. It always has been. It told you that love couldn't handle the truth. But love is the only thing that can. Look at us right now. We're sitting here. You're alive. Lucas is sleeping in the next room. That is what love does. It survives the worst lies and still shows up at the kitchen table the next day. They cried together then, not the loud, desperate sobs from yesterday, but quieter, deeper tears, the kind that come when old wounds are finally being cleaned. Ellen reached up and brushed Sophie's hair back from her face with that familiar gesture. The same one she'd used when Sophie had nightmares as a child. I want to know everything about the last 2 years, Ellen said when the tears slowed. Not the scary parts. The small parts. What did you eat when you were pregnant? Did Lucas kick a lot? Did you sing to him the same lullaby I used to sing to you? I missed all of it. And I want it back. Every single moment you're willing to give me. Sophie smiled through her tears, a real smile. Small and shaky but real. She started talking. She told her mother about the midnight cravings for pickles and ice cream, about the way Lucas would press his little foot against her ribs when she played old Springsteen songs, about the nights she sat alone in the yellow house whispering stories to her belly because she was terrified he would grow up without grandparents. She told Ellen about the green cardigan, how she bought it the week after Lucas was born because it reminded her of the one Ellen used to wear when she rocked Sophie to sleep. Ellen listened like the whole world had narrowed down to her daughter's voice. She laughed softly at the funny parts, cried at the lonely ones, and never once let go of Sophie's hands. At one point she stood up, walked around the table, and pulled Sophie into her lap the way she used to, when Sophie was small, 30 years old, mother of her own child, and Sophie curled into her mother like she was 6 again. They rocked together slowly, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. I watched from the window, my own eyes burning. The late afternoon light fell across their shoulders and turned their hair gold. In that moment I understood something I had never fully grasped before. Healing isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It happens in quiet kitchens and whispered stories and the simple act of a mother rocking her grown daughter like she's still the most precious thing in the world. After a long while, Ellen kissed the top of Sophie's head and whispered something I couldn't hear. Sophie nodded, smiling through fresh tears. They stayed like that for several more minutes, just holding each other, letting the silence do the rest of the work. When they finally stood up, Ellen cupped Sophie's face again and looked her straight in the eyes. "You are my daughter," she said, voice strong and clear. "You will always be my daughter." The grave was empty, but my heart was never empty of you. Not for one single day. Welcome home, baby girl. Sophie wrapped her arms around her mother one last time. "I'm home, Mom. I'm really home." I stepped away from the window then, giving them the last private moment they needed. My chest felt lighter than it had in 2 years. The legal storm was still coming. The syndicate shadow hadn't completely vanished. But right here, in this ordinary house, on an ordinary street in Columbus, Ohio, something sacred had happened. A mother and daughter had found each other again. And that was the kind of healing no court document or repayment plan could ever replace. The late afternoon light had softened into a gentle gold by the time we left the house. Lucas was napping peacefully in the portable crib, watched over by the midwife for a little while longer. Sophie looked at her mother, then at me, and said the words none of us had expected so soon. "I think we should go to the cemetery. All of us. Today. Before the sun goes down." Ellen didn't hesitate. She simply nodded, wiped her eyes one last time, and reached for her coat. "Yes," she said quietly. "It's time." We drove in silence. The four of us in my car, Ellen in the front, Sophie and Marcus in the back. The familiar route to the cemetery felt different now. The same trees, the same winding road, the same iron gates that had welcomed me every Sunday for 2 years. But this time, the car carried life instead of grief. I parked in the usual spot under the old oak. The grass was still damp from last night's rain. Fallen leaves scattered across the paths like nature's confetti. We walked together down the gentle slope to the plot I had visited so many times I could have found it with my eyes closed. The headstone stood exactly where it had always been. Simple granite. Sophie's name carved in clean letters. The dates. The short line I had chosen myself. "Beloved daughter, forever in our hearts." We stopped a few feet away. No one spoke at first. The wind moved through the trees with a soft rustle, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and distant rain. I stepped forward alone and knelt in front of the stone the way I had done hundreds of times before. My fingers brushed the cold granite. "Hey, kiddo," I said, my voice low but steady. "It's me again. But this time I'm not alone." Behind me, I heard Sophie's quiet intake of breath. Ellen's hand found mine and squeezed once, hard. "I brought flowers every Sunday," I continued, talking to the stone like it could still hear me. "I told you about the bookstore, about Mom's new recipe for meatloaf, about how much we missed you. I stood here and wondered what I did wrong as a father. I blamed myself. I blamed the world. I blamed God. And all this time, you were alive, breathing, raising a little boy I hadn't even met yet." My voice cracked, but I kept going. "This grave was never yours. It was just a piece of ground we filled with our pain. Today we're taking that pain back. We're choosing truth instead of silence. We're choosing family instead of secrets." I stood up slowly and stepped aside. Sophie moved forward. She carried a small bouquet of white roses we had stopped to buy, on the way the same kind Ellen used to bring every week. She knelt in the grass, placed the flowers gently at the base of the stone, and rested her forehead against the granite for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice clear and trembling but strong enough for all of us to hear. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I let you stand here thinking I was gone. I'm sorry I made you cry at a grave that was never mine. I was scared, and I was wrong. But I'm here now. I'm alive. I'm your daughter again. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this right. I love you, Mom. I love you, Dad. And I'm never going to disappear on you again." She stayed there on her knees for a long time, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Ellen stepped forward and knelt beside her, wrapping one arm around Sophie's waist. The two of them stayed like that mother and daughter, side by side in front of a stone that no longer held the person they loved. Marcus stood a respectful distance away, head bowed, giving them the space they needed. I stood behind them, one hand resting on Ellen's shoulder, feeling the warmth of my family through the thin fabric of her coat. The sun dipped lower, painting the headstone in soft amber light. For the first time in 2 years, standing in this place didn't feel like visiting a grave. It felt like closing a chapter, like saying goodbye to the lie and hello to the truth. Ellen finally spoke, her voice soft but carrying across the quiet rows of stones. "This stone doesn't belong to our daughter anymore," she said. "Tomorrow we'll talk to the cemetery about removing it. We don't need a grave to remember you, Sophie. We have you. We have Lucas. We have each other." Sophie lifted her head and looked at her mother, eyes shining with fresh tears. and something that looked a lot like peace. "Thank you," she whispered. We stayed until the light began to fade. No one was in a hurry to leave. The wind moved through the trees again. Gentler this time, almost like it was carrying the last of the old pain away. When we finally turned to walk back to the car, Sophie slipped her hand into mine on one side and Ellen's on the other. Marcus walked quietly behind us, part of the circle now, even if he still had a long way to go to earn his place in it. The grave was still empty, but the four of us walking away from it were full of truth, full of pain that was finally being healed, full of the kind of love that survives even the worst kinds of secrets. And for the first time since that terrible Tuesday 2 years ago, the road ahead didn't feel dark. It felt like home. We drove back from the cemetery in the soft dusk light, the four of us wrapped in a silence that felt peaceful instead of heavy. The river came into view first, its surface catching the last streaks of orange and gold. The pale yellow house waited at the end of Heian Court, like it had been holding its breath for us. When I pulled into the driveway, Sophie let out a long, shaky breath. "This place saved us," she said quietly. "But it's time to leave it behind." Inside, Lucas was awake and fussing gently in his crib. The midwife had left a note, saying she would check back in the morning. Ellen went straight to him, lifting the little boy into her arms with the natural ease of someone who had been waiting 2 years to hold her grandchild. Lucas stared at her with wide hazel eyes, Sophie's eyes, and reached for her face with a tiny hand. Ellen's laugh broke through the quiet like sunlight. We gathered around the kitchen table again, this time with Lucas on Ellen's lap, his small fingers wrapped around her thumb. Marcus made fresh coffee while Sophie pulled out a notebook she had kept hidden in the back bedroom. The pages were filled with careful lists and sketches, baby milestones, apartment listings near German village, even a rough budget for the repayment plan. "We've been talking about this for months," Sophie said, opening the notebook. "We want to sell this house as soon as the legal side is cleared. The realtor I spoke with yesterday thinks we can get enough to cover the first big restitution payment and still have something left to put down on a place closer to you two." Ellen rocked Lucas gently, her eyes never leaving Sophie's face. "You don't have to rush on our account, sweetheart. But I won't lie, I want you close. I want to watch Lucas grow up. I want to be the grandma who spoils him rotten and sends him home with too much sugar." I smiled for the first time in what felt like days. "And I want him in the bookstore on Saturday mornings. We'll start him on the picture books early. Teach him how to shelve the history section before he can walk." Marcus spoke up, his voice low but steady. "I've already contacted the insurance adjuster. They're willing to work out a structured repayment if we show good faith. Terrence says the DA is leaning toward a plea deal with probation instead of jail time, as long as we cooperate fully and the money starts coming back. I'll take a second job if I have to. Whatever it takes." Sophie reached over and covered his hand with hers. It wasn't full forgiveness yet, but it was trust, beginning to grow again, fragile, careful, but real. "We're in this together," she said. "All of us. No more carrying things alone." We spent the next hour making real plans. Sophie would start working part-time at the bookstore once things settled. "I always loved the smell of old books," she said with a small laugh. Marcus would look for logistics work again, something clean and steady. Ellen and I offered the spare bedroom in our house until they found something nearby. Lucas would have his own corner in the living room, with the old wooden blocks I had saved from Sophie's childhood. At one point, Ellen looked up from Lucas's sleepy face and said, "There's one more thing I need to say before we close this chapter. I don't want any of us walking around with guilt as a roommate. We all made choices. Some were wrong. Some were desperate. But we're choosing different now. That's what matters." Sophie nodded, tears glistening but not falling. "I want Lucas to grow up knowing the truth, not the scary version, but the real one, that his mom and dad made a terrible mistake out of fear. But his grandparents loved him enough to forgive and fight for him anyway." Marcus looked at me across the table. "Alan, I know I don't deserve your trust yet, but I'm going to earn it. Every single day." I met his eyes and held them. "You start by showing up. That's all any of us can do." The conversation drifted then to lighter things, Lucas's favorite foods, Sophie's pregnancy cravings, the time she tried to bake Ellen's meatloaf recipe in the yellow house and nearly set off the smoke alarm. Laughter came easier now. Small and tentative, but growing stronger with every story. The river outside kept its steady rhythm, like it had decided to carry the last of the old pain downstream and leave only the future behind. When Lucas finally fell asleep again, Sophie carried him to the back bedroom. Ellen followed to help settle him in. I stayed at the table with Marcus for a moment, the two of us sitting in the quiet kitchen light. I meant what I said earlier, he told me. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this right. I nodded slowly. Then, start tomorrow. That's how you earn a family back. He didn't argue. He just stood up, cleared the empty mugs, and washed them in the sink like it was the most important thing he could do in that moment. Later, when Sophie and Ellen came back out, the four of us stood together in the living room. The house felt smaller now, warmer, like it knew it had done its job and was ready to let us go. I looked at my wife, my daughter, my son-in-law, and the little boy sleeping peacefully down the hall. The grave was empty, but this house and the one waiting for us back in German Village was full of second chances, full of hard conversations still to come, full of the kind of love that survives even the worst kinds of secrets and still chooses to build something better on the other side. Tomorrow, we would start the real work. Lawyers, repayments, moving boxes, and the slow, careful rebuilding of trust. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I went to sleep, knowing my daughter was under the same sky as me, and that was more than enough to carry us forward. I sat alone on the back porch of the pale yellow house long after everyone else had gone to bed. The river moved quietly beyond the trees, silver under the moonlight, carrying away the last echoes of the day. Lucas was asleep in the back bedroom, his soft breathing drifting through the open window like a promise. Sophie and Marcus had turned in early, exhausted but peaceful for the first time in years. Ellen was inside, curled up on the couch with one of my old history books, the one she always pretended to read when she really just wanted to be near me. I held a single white rose in my hands, the last one from the bouquet we had taken to the cemetery. Its petals were soft, almost fragile, yet they had survived the cold October night. I turned it slowly, thinking about how something so delicate could still carry so much meaning. 2 years ago, I thought my world had ended on a rainy Tuesday. Today, I realized it had only been paused. The grave was empty, but my life was suddenly full again, in ways I never dared to imagine. A daughter returned. A grandson I hadn't known existed. A wife whose smile tonight carried a light I hadn't seen since the funeral. Even Marcus, a man I once wanted to hate with every fiber of my being, had become part of the story we were choosing to rewrite together. I thought about everything we had lost and everything we had gained. Fear had stolen 2 years from us. Secrets had built walls. But love's stubborn, messy, unbreakable love had torn those walls down. It always does. God has a way of turning even the darkest chapters into something beautiful if we let him. He turned an empty grave into a second chance. He turned my broken heart into a bigger one. He reminded me that no lie, no matter how well crafted, can ever defeat the truth when it finally steps into the light. That's the lesson I'm carrying with me now. Life will break you. People you love will make choices that shatter you. Fear will whisper that disappearing is safer than facing the storm. But the grave is never the end of the story. The grave is only the place where we lay down what no longer serves us. What rises after forgiveness, truth, family, that's where the real miracle begins. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. The river kept moving, steady and sure, the way God's grace moves through even the hardest seasons. I whispered a quiet thank you into the night. The first of 3 I owed him. Thank you for bringing my daughter home. Thank you for giving us Lucas. Thank you for teaching an old bookstore owner that love is stronger than any lie ever told. Ellen stepped out behind me, her bare feet soft on the wooden boards. She didn't say anything at first, She simply slipped her arm around my waist and rested her head on my shoulder the way she has for 34 years. We stood there together, watching the river, breathing the same cold October air. "She's really here," Ellen whispered. "She's really here," I answered. We stayed like that until the moon climbed higher. No more words were needed. The healing had begun not with grand gestures, but with quiet nights, honest conversations, and the simple decision to choose each other again and again. Tomorrow the legal work would continue. Tomorrow we would start packing boxes and making phone calls and figuring out how to explain a miracle to the world. But tonight, under a sky full of stars, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 long years. Peace. Complete, bone-deep peace. The grave was empty, but our family was full, and that fullness was the greatest gift God could have ever given us. If this story touched something in your heart tonight, if you've ever stood at a grave that felt too heavy, or loved someone who made a choice that broke you, or wondered if forgiveness was even possible, then I hope you'll do one simple thing. Hit that like button. Leave a comment and tell me what part spoke to you the most. Share it with someone who needs to hear that second chances still exist. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, I bring you real stories about real people who chose wrong, faced the consequences, and still found their way back to love, truth, and family. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not the mistakes we made, not the graves we once stood beside, but the way we choose to rise. Thank you for being here with me through every twist, every tear, and every hard-won moment of healing. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, hold your people close. The grave may be empty, but love never is.